I still remember the exact shade of red on my fingernails the day I decided I would destroy my husband. It was a deep crimson, almost the color of dried blood. Fitting, considering the slow death my soul had experienced over 45 years of marriage to Rutherford Hargrove. You missed a spot while dusting again, Marlowe. Honestly, what do you even do all day? You're just worthless trash pretending to be a proper wife. Ford's words barely registered anymore. At 68, I had heard every variation of his contempt. I simply nodded, my eyes downcast as they had been for decades, and shuffled over to the antique credenza to wipe away a speck of dust only visible to his hypercritical gaze. Behind me, I could hear the ice clinking in his tumbler of bourbon, his third of the evening, and it wasn't even 6 o'clock. The grandfather clock in the corner of our Boston mansion's living room ticked away, marking another moment closer to the culmination of my patient plan. "I'm sorry, Ford," I murmured, my voice soft and trembling, exactly how he liked it. Weak, submissive, broken. Little did he know I'd been acting for most of our marriage. "The Prestons will be here in an hour. Try not to embarrass me for once," he sighed, running his hand through his silver hair, still thick despite his 72 years, just like his ego. "And change into the blue dress I bought you. The one you're wearing makes you look like an old hag." I nodded again, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation mixed with hatred. The blue dress was 2 sizes too small. Ford's not-so-subtle way of reminding me that my body, like everything else about me in his eyes, was inadequate. As I climbed the sweeping staircase to our bedroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the ornate mirror hanging in the hallway. Gray-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a conservative bun, crow's feet mapping my pale blue eyes, lips pressed into a permanent line of quiet endurance. I looked every bit the defeated suburban matriarch Ford had shaped me to be. Only my eyes betrayed me, a flash of something cold and calculating that disappeared as quickly as it came. In our bedroom, a space that had seen more tears than passion, I opened my closet to retrieve the too-tight blue dress. Behind it, hidden in a secret compartment I'd installed 20 years ago, was a burner phone. I checked it quickly. One new message from Knox. "Everything is in place, waiting for your signal." I allowed myself a small, private smile before slipping the phone back into its hiding place. Downstairs, I could hear Ford on a business call, his voice booming with artificial charm and confidence. Rutherford Hargrove, the titan of New England real estate development, beloved by politicians and socialites alike. If only they knew how he spoke to his wife of nearly half a century when the doors were closed. As I squeezed into the blue dress, wincing as the zipper strained against my flesh, I thought back to the beginning. How different things had been, or at least how different I'd thought they were. I was just 23 when we met, fresh out of college with dreams of becoming an architect. Ford was 27, already making a name for himself in his father's real estate business. He was handsome, ambitious, and when he looked at me, I felt seen for the first time in my life. The courtship was a whirlwind. My parents, struggling middle-class people with aspirations above their station, were thrilled when Ford proposed after just 6 months. The wedding was lavish, paid for entirely by Ford's family, who made it clear that I was marrying up. The first slap came 3 months after the wedding, when I suggested I might want to pursue my architecture career. The first time he called me worthless trash was on our first anniversary, when I burned the roast I'd spent all day preparing. By the time our first child, Jasper, was born a year later, I already knew the truth. I had made a terrible mistake, but I was trapped. Trapped by my pregnancy, by financial dependence, by the shame of admitting failure, by my parents' expectations. So I stayed, telling myself it would get better. It never did. When Zinnia came along 3 years after Jasper, Ford doted on her in a way he never had with our son or me. She was his princess, his legacy. Jasper, sensitive and kind, like I once was, became the target of Ford's disapproval. The years blurred together in a haze of social appearances, silent dinners, and private humiliations. Ford's business grew exponentially, and with it, his cruelty. Success only validated his belief that he was superior, deserving of admiration and obedience. I became less a wife and more a possession, a symbol of his achievement, the perfect, quiet, ornamental spouse who managed his household flawlessly and never, ever questioned him. But something happened on my 50th birthday, a day Ford forgot entirely. I realized with startling clarity that I might live another 30 years in this gilded cage, dying slowly each day, unless I found a way out. That was the day I met with Knox Thornfield for the first time. An unassuming attorney recommended by a woman I'd met at a charity function, Knox became my salvation. Together, we formulated a plan so patient and meticulous that it would take nearly 2 decades to fully execute. "Marlowe!" Ford's voice bellowed from downstairs, snapping me back to the present. "Get down here! The Prestons are early!" I took one final look in the mirror, pinched my cheeks for color, and practiced my society smile. Vacant, pleasant, and completely false. "Coming, dear," I called back, my voice honey-sweet. The Prestons were Ford's newest potential investors, a tech couple in their 40s who had made their fortune in Silicon Valley and were looking to diversify into East Coast real estate. They were exactly the type Ford had been pursuing desperately for the past year, unaware that his business was already crumbling beneath him, undermined by my careful machinations. "There she is," Ford announced as I descended the stairs, his hand possessively gripping my waist when I reached his side. His fingers dug into the flesh above my hip, a warning to behave. My better half, though she'd never admit it. The Prestons smiled politely. The wife, a stylish woman with intelligent eyes, gave me a look I recognized, pity mixed with discomfort. She could sense the dynamic between us. Women always could. "Lovely to meet you," I said, extending my hand. "Welcome to our home." "Marlowe doesn't involve herself in business matters," Ford interjected before I could say more, guiding us all toward the living room. "Her talents lie in maintaining our home and social calendar. Isn't that right, darling?" I nodded demurely, playing my part. "I leave the important decisions to my husband." The look of satisfaction on Ford's face was almost comical. He had no idea that for the past 18 years, I had been making all the important decisions, through shell companies, through proxies, through careful legal maneuvering facilitated by Knox. While Ford believed I was attending garden club meetings and charity luncheons, I was secretly building my own empire, acquiring properties from beneath him and redirecting assets into my name. It began with one small investment, a parcel of land Ford had dismissed as worthless that I knew would eventually be valuable. I used the small inheritance from my mother to purchase it through a corporation Knox had established for me. When it tripled in value 2 years later, I used the profits to do it again, and again, and again. Over time, I began to systematically undermine Ford's business from within, careful never to be detected. I befriended his associates' wives, gathering information during seemingly innocent conversations. I volunteered to organize his home office when he was away, photographing documents. I listened in on phone calls, memorizing details, noting weaknesses in his business strategy. With each year, my confidence grew alongside my secret fortune. The meek housewife act became exactly that, an act I performed to keep Ford's suspicions at bay. The more he underestimated me, the more freely I could operate. "Marlowe, why don't you check on dinner?" Ford suggested, though it was clearly a command. "Of course," I replied, excusing myself to the kitchen where our longtime housekeeper, Luce, had everything perfectly under control, as she always did. "He's in rare form tonight," Luce whispered to me when I entered. Luce was one of the few people who glimpsed the real me occasionally. After 25 years in our household, she had seen enough to know the truth of my marriage. "The Prestons are important to him," I replied, keeping my voice low. "The Westport development is his last chance to save the business." What Ford didn't know was that the Westport development would never break ground. The environmental permit he believed was secured had been quietly challenged by a conservation group, funded anonymously by me. The land itself was tied up in a complex ownership dispute that would take years to resolve, orchestrated again by me through various legal entities Knox had established. As I arranged canapes on a silver tray, my burner phone vibrated in the hidden pocket I'd sewn into my dress. Another text from Knox. "Hospital called. It's time." My heart raced, but my hands remained steady. After all these years of waiting, everything was converging at once. I took a deep breath and returned to the living room with the appetizers. There she is, Ford said with a tight smile, always making sure everyone's taken care of. Mrs. Preston, Elaine, she'd asked me to call her, accepted a canapé. These look wonderful. Did you make them yourself, Marlowe? Before I could answer, Ford laughed dismissively. Marlowe can barely boil water. Our housekeeper handles the cooking. I forced a self-deprecating smile. Ford's right. I'm afraid the kitchen has never been my domain. Marlowe's talents lie elsewhere, Ford continued, his tone making it clear he believed I had none. She's best at spending my money and looking decorative. The Prestons shifted uncomfortably. Greg Preston cleared his throat. Well, I think maintaining a beautiful home like this is no small achievement. Ford waved his hand dismissively. Let's get back to business, shall we? The Westport development. His cell phone rang, interrupting him. Ford glanced at the screen with annoyance, then surprise. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped into the hallway. I could hear his voice rise in shock and concern. When he returned, his face had lost its color. I apologize, but we'll need to reschedule. My brother Wallace has been taken to the hospital. Possible heart attack. He turned to me, already dismissing me from his thoughts. Don't wait up. I'll be at Mass General all night. Wallace, Ford's younger brother and only living family besides our children, was indeed at Mass General Hospital. The heart episode, however, was a minor one, deliberately timed through careful manipulation of his medication by his private nurse, another ally in my intricate plan. Wallace would be fine, but he would keep Ford distracted for the crucial next 24 hours. After the Prestons left with promises to reconnect soon, promises that would never be fulfilled, as their interest in Ford's business was entirely fabricated, they were actors hired by Knox. I went upstairs and changed out of the constricting blue dress. In its place, I put on an elegant pantsuit I kept hidden in the back of my closet. I removed the bun, letting my hair fall to my shoulders, and applied makeup that highlighted rather than diminished my features. As I stared at my reflection, I barely recognized myself. This was the real Marlowe Hargrove. Not the cowering, insecure woman Ford had created, but the calculating businesswoman who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. I picked up my regular phone and dialed a number I rarely called. Hello? The voice was cautious, guarded. Jasper, it's Mom. I paused, knowing how rarely I reached out. It's happening. Tonight. There was silence on the other end, then a deep exhale. Are you sure you're ready? I've been ready for 18 years, I replied, steel in my voice. Your father is at the hospital with Wallace. The heart episode was minor, but it will keep him occupied. Everything else is in place. What about Zinnia? He asked, referring to his sister, who had grown to be as dismissive of me as her father was. She'll know soon enough, I said, but you deserve to hear it from me first. Another pause. I'll be on the first flight to Boston tomorrow. Thank you, I whispered, emotion finally cracking through my composed exterior. My son, the only person who had seen Ford for what he was, who had tried to protect me even as a young boy, and who had paid for it by being essentially disowned, was still willing to stand by me. After hanging up, I made one more call, to Wynne Davenport, once Ford's mistress, now my most unexpected ally. She answered on the first ring. Is it time? She asked without preamble. Yes. Are the documents ready? Everything's set. Knox has them. We're meeting at his office at 9 a.m. Perfect. I took a deep breath. After all these years, he deserves everything that's coming to him, Wynne said firmly. I only regret it took me so long to see him for what he is. When we ended the call, I went to my private study, a small room Ford never entered because he considered my hobbies and interests beneath his notice. From the safe hidden behind a mediocre watercolor painting, another thing Ford mocked regularly, I removed the final piece of my plan, a USB drive containing every transaction, every shell company, every asset transfer from the past 18 years. Proof that while Ford believed he was building his empire, I had actually been dismantling it brick by brick and rebuilding it in my name. Tomorrow, Rutherford Hargrove would discover that his business was bankrupt, his properties were gone, his reputation was in tatters, and his wife, his worthless trash, owned everything. I slipped the USB drive into my purse, along with a set of keys Ford had never seen. Tonight would be my last night in this house, this beautiful prison. Tomorrow I would move into my own home, one Ford didn't even know existed. As I lay in our bed for the final time, listening to the grandfather clock chiming midnight, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was to come. Not regret. I had moved beyond that long ago, but anticipation. For the first time in 45 years, I would look into my husband's eyes, not as a victim, but as his reckoning. "You're just worthless trash," he had told me countless times throughout our marriage. By this time tomorrow, he would know exactly how wrong he had been. The morning light streamed through the curtains I had selected years ago, pale blue silk that Ford had complained were too expensive, yet insisted on showing off to guests. I had been awake for hours, waiting for the clock to reach 7. My suitcase, packed with only essentials, was hidden in my study. Everything else I needed was already at my new home. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Zinnia. She must have heard about Wallace from Ford. I wasn't ready to speak with my daughter yet, not when she would undoubtedly parrot her father's concerns rather than ask about my well-being. At precisely 7:15, my phone rang again. Knox. "Everything's ready," he said when I answered. "The papers have been delivered to all relevant parties. The bank transfers were completed overnight. The press has received the anonymous tip. It's all in motion, Marlowe." "Thank you, Knox," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I'll see you at 9. I rose from the bed I'd shared with a man who had systematically crushed my spirit for decades. Today would be the last time I would ever have to pretend to be less than I was. In the bathroom, I took longer than usual with my appearance. The woman who stared back from the mirror was transforming, hair styled in soft waves rather than my usual severe bun, makeup applied with a skilled hand to enhance rather than diminish my features. I selected an outfit Ford had never seen, a tailored crimson suit that hugged my figure in a way my usual shapeless dresses never did. As I descended the stairs, our housekeeper, Luce, gasped. "Mrs. Hargrove," she whispered. "You look—" She trailed off, seemingly unsure if she should comment. "Thank you, Luce," I said with a genuine smile. "And please, after all these years, call me Marlowe." Her eyes widened slightly at this break in protocol, but she nodded. "There's something I need to tell you," I continued, lowering my voice. "Mr. Hargrove will be coming home to some difficult news today. I won't be here when he does. The envelope on my desk has everything you need to know, including a recommendation letter and a very generous severance package. You've been more than an employee to me, Luz. You've been a friend when I needed one most." Confusion and concern crossed her face. "Mrs. Marlowe, what's happening?" "Change," I said simply. "Long overdue change. Don't worry, you'll be well taken care of." Before she could ask more questions, my phone chimed with a text from Wynne. "He's on his way to the office. Wallace was discharged this morning." Perfect timing. Ford would be walking into his office just as his world began to collapse. I gathered my purse and the small suitcase I'd brought downstairs while Luce was preparing breakfast. "I won't be joining Mr. Hargrove for dinner tonight," I said. "Or any other night." With those words, I walked out the front door of the mansion that had been my prison for 4 decades. My driver, not Ford's, was waiting at the curb with a nondescript black sedan. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. Knox's office was in a modern building downtown, far from the historic brick edifice where Ford's company had been headquartered for generations. The contrast was fitting, old power versus new reality. In the elevator, I touched up my lipstick. The same deep crimson as my suit, war paint as my mother would have called it. The thought made me smile. My mother, despite pushing me into this marriage, had been a fighter in her own way. She wouldn't have approved of my methods, but I like to think she would have understood my need to reclaim my life. Knox was waiting when the elevator doors opened. At 70, he had lost none of his sharp intelligence or quiet dignity. His silver hair was impeccably styled, his suit custom-made but understated. He had been my rock through this entire process, the one person who never doubted my ability to see this through. "You look formidable," he said by way of greeting. "I feel formidable," I replied. He offered his arm, and together we walked into the conference room where Wynne and 3 other people were waiting. Knox's junior partner, a court reporter, and a distinguished-looking woman I recognized as Judge Eliza Brewer, retired now, but still influential, and more importantly, someone who had never been charmed by Ford despite his many attempts. Everything is proceeding as planned, Knox said as we took our seats. Ford arrived at his office 15 minutes ago. Based on my contact there, he's just been informed about the Boston Herald article. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I held it up so everyone could see the headline: Hargrove Empire Crumbling. Fraud allegations and financial mismanagement surface. The article detailed suspicious financial activities within Ford's company, quoting anonymous sources close to the business. It mentioned potential investor lawsuits, questioned the viability of several high-profile developments, and hinted at possible criminal investigations. What it didn't mention, yet, was my role in all of this. His assistant reports that he's trying to reach his financial team, but they're all mysteriously unavailable this morning, Knox continued, a rare smile crossing his usually stoic face. The bank should be calling him any moment to inform him that his business accounts have been frozen pending investigation. Wynne leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the polished conference table. At 66, she remained striking, with sharp cheekbones and penetrating gray eyes. Are we sure he won't suspect right away that you're behind this, Marlowe? He might come looking for you here. Ford believes I'm meeting with the Garden Club committee this morning, I replied. It would never occur to him that I could orchestrate something like this. In his mind, I'm barely capable of organizing a charity luncheon, let alone dismantling his entire business empire. Besides, Knox added, we have security downstairs with clear instructions. He won't get past the lobby if he does figure it out. My phone rang. Zinnia. I silenced it. Your daughter will be calling him next, Wynne predicted. She always runs to Daddy in a crisis. She was right, of course. Zinnia, at 40, still behaved like a teenager seeking Ford's approval. She had adopted his dismissive attitude toward me years ago, treating me with the same condescending tolerance her father did. Unlike Jasper, who had seen through Ford's facade early on, Zinnia worshipped her father and considered me an embarrassment. Let's proceed, I said, pushing thoughts of my daughter aside. What's next? Knox nodded to his junior partner, who opened a laptop and turned it to face me. On the screen was a live feed from a security camera in Ford's office building lobby. We watched as my husband burst through the revolving doors, his face contorted with rage, shouting into his phone. Even without audio, I could read his expressions after decades of marriage. He was demanding answers, threatening whoever was on the other end of the line. His normally carefully maintained appearance was already showing signs of stress. Tie askew, hair mussed from running his hands through it, a trait I knew signaled his rising panic. The property transfer documents have all been filed, Knox said, turning away from the screen. As of 8 a.m. this morning, the mansion and all other residential properties have been officially transferred to your name alone, removing his name completely. The prenuptial agreement he forced you to sign has been invalidated based on the evidence of coercion we've documented over the years. I nodded, remembering the prenup, a humiliating document Ford had presented the day before our wedding, essentially stating that I would leave with nothing if the marriage ended. He'd threatened to cancel the wedding if I didn't sign, knowing my family had already spent money they didn't have on the event. What about the safety deposit boxes? I asked. Emptied last night, Wynne confirmed. The jewelry, the bearer bonds, the rare coins, all moved to the secure location we discussed. I felt a momentary pang of conscience. Not for Ford, but for Wallace. His heart episode, while deliberately timed through the manipulation of his medication by his nurse, who was on my payroll, had been real enough. Wallace had always been kinder than his brother, though not kind enough to ever stand up to Ford on my behalf. Wallace won't suffer financially, Knox assured me, seemingly reading my thoughts. The trust fund we established for him will ensure he's comfortable for the rest of his life. My phone buzzed again, a text this time from Jasper. Just landed, coming straight to Knox's office. A wave of emotion washed over me. My son, who had stood up to his father at 18 and been all but disowned for it, was the only family member who knew about my plans. Even then, he knew only the broad strokes, not the intricate details of how I'd systematically undermined Ford's business and transferred assets to myself over the years. Mr. Hargrove has just received notification that his personal accounts have been frozen, Knox's junior partner announced, looking up from his own phone. And the DA's office has issued a statement that they're reviewing evidence of potential financial improprieties at Hargrove Developments. There was no going back now. The machine I had set in motion was running at full speed. "Win," I said, turning to my former rival. "It's time for your part." Win nodded, her expression grim but determined. She had once been Ford's mistress, one of many over the years, but the only one he had promised to leave me for. When he discarded her instead, her humiliation had been complete. She had approached me 5 years ago, initially to apologize, but our conversation had evolved into something else entirely, an alliance. With her society connections and intimate knowledge of Ford's private affairs, Wynne had been an invaluable asset in my plan. She rose now, smoothing her elegant navy dress. "The society vultures are already circling," she said with a cold smile. "By lunchtime, every club and charity board in Boston will be buzzing with the news that the great Rutherford Hargrove is not only broke, but potentially facing criminal charges. I've made sure the right ears have heard the right whispers. The social humiliation would devastate Ford almost as much as the financial ruin. His reputation, his standing in the community. These were things he valued above almost everything except money. By dinner, his phone would be filled with canceled invitations and sudden unavailability from people who had courted his favor just yesterday. A knock at the door interrupted us. Knox's assistant entered, looking somewhat flustered. "Ms. Zinnia Hargrove Calloway is downstairs, demanding to see her mother," she announced. "She's quite insistent." I exchanged glances with Knox. This was earlier than I'd anticipated. Zinnia must have gone straight to the mansion after calling me, only to be told by Luce that I had left. "Send her up," I said after a moment's consideration. It's time she learned the truth as well. While we waited, Knox reviewed the final documents requiring my signature. Formal complaints against Ford alleging years of emotional abuse, financial affidavits showing my rightful ownership of assets he had believed were his, and a petition for divorce that would be filed by the end of the day. The conference room door burst open, and Zinnia stormed in. She was the image of her father in female form, tall, imposing, with the same cold blue eyes and imperious expression. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her expensive suit screamed corporate power. "Mother, what is going on?" she demanded, then stopped short as she took in the scene before her. The formal gathering, the documents spread across the table, my transformed appearance. What is this?" "Hello, Zinnia," I said calmly. "Please take a seat. There's a lot you need to know." "I don't want to sit," she snapped. "I want to know why Dad just called me in a panic saying his accounts are frozen and there are reporters camped outside his office asking about fraud. What have you done?" The accusation in her voice, the immediate assumption that any problem must be my fault, was so typical of her attitude toward me that I almost laughed. "What I've done," I said, rising to face her at eye level, "is take back what's rightfully mine after 45 years of enduring your father's emotional abuse, his infidelity, his constant belittlement, and his theft of my dignity." Zinnia's face flushed with anger. "Abuse? Don't be ridiculous. Dad has given you everything, this lifestyle, this social position. You've never had to work a day in your life." "That's enough, Zinnia," came a male voice from the doorway. Jasper stood there, his tall frame filling the entrance. At 43, he looked nothing like Ford. He had inherited my auburn hair and green eyes, my softer features. But there was a strength in his stance that was all his own. "Jasper?" Zinnia's voice faltered with surprise. "What are you doing here? You haven't spoken to any of us in years." "I've spoken to Mom," he corrected her, crossing the room to stand beside me. "Just because you never bothered to notice her calls to me doesn't mean they didn't happen." He put his arm around my shoulders in a protective gesture that made my heart swell. This was the son who had witnessed Ford's cruelty throughout his childhood, who had tried to defend me even as a boy, and who had finally cut ties with his father after a particularly vicious tirade against me when Jasper was 18. "What's happening here is long overdue justice," Jasper continued, addressing his sister. "Dad is finally facing the consequences of how he's treated Mom all these years. And you might want to sit down for this part, Zin, because it turns out our mother is a hell of a lot smarter and more capable than either of you ever gave her credit for." Zinnia's eyes darted around the room, taking in the formal setting, the legal documents, the court reporter quietly documenting everything. Confusion and fear began to replace the anger in her expression. "Mom?" she said, her voice suddenly younger, uncertain. For a moment, I saw the little girl she had once been, before Ford had molded her in his image. It nearly broke my resolve, but I remembered all the times she had joined in her father's mockery of me, had dismissed my attempts to connect with her, had treated me as nothing more than an embarrassing obligation. "Your father is bankrupt," I said simply. "His business has been systematically dismantled over the past 18 years, by me. The properties he thought he owned are actually in my name. The investments he counted on have been redirected. The mansion, the vacation homes, the art collection, all legally mine. He has nothing left except the clothes on his back and whatever might be in his wallet right now." Zinnia sank into a chair, her legs seemingly unable to support her anymore. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You don't know anything about business. You barely finished college." "Another misconception," Knox interjected smoothly. "Your mother graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business before she met your father. She was accepted to Harvard Business School, but declined to attend after your father proposed, at his insistence." This was news even to Jasper, who looked at me with surprise. I had never told anyone about the Harvard acceptance. It had been too painful to discuss after Ford had made me burn the acceptance letter while he watched, telling me I wouldn't need an education to be his wife. "But why?" Zinnia asked, her voice small. "Why would you do this to us?" "Not to us, Zinnia. To him," Jasper corrected her. "And after what he's put Mom through, he deserves every bit of it." My phone buzzed again, an incoming call from Ford. I showed the screen to everyone at the table before answering and putting it on speaker. "Marlo, where the hell are you?" Ford's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Something's happening with the accounts. I need you to come to the office right now." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Ford," I replied, my voice calm and clear, not the meek tone he was accustomed to. "I'm in a meeting." There was a pause, then a short, incredulous laugh. "A meeting? What kind of meeting could you possibly be having that's more important than this emergency? The garden club can wait, for God's sake." "I'm meeting with my attorney, actually, and several other interesting people who are quite eager to discuss your financial situation." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, suspicion creeping in where arrogant dismissal had been. "What attorney? What are you talking about, Marlo?" "You'll be receiving divorce papers by the end of the day, Ford, along with a detailed accounting of how your business empire has been transferred to my name over the past 18 years. You're just worthless trash, you told me, thousands of times. I've been keeping count." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "This is a joke," he finally said, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "You couldn't possibly. You don't have the brains or the backbone for something like this." "That's exactly what I was counting on you to believe," I replied. "It made everything so much easier. While you were busy underestimating me, I was busy taking everything from you. Just like you took everything from me all those years ago. My dreams, my self-worth, my dignity." "Zinnia," he barked suddenly, "is your mother with you? Are you hearing this insanity?" I looked at our daughter, whose face had gone pale with shock. "I'm here, Dad," she said weakly. "Tell her she's lost her mind. Tell her to stop whatever this is immediately." Zinnia looked at me, then at Jasper, then at the documents on the table. For the first time in her adult life, she seemed to be seeing the situation clearly. I think you should listen to what Mom has to say," she said hesitantly. Ford's roar of outrage was so loud that I had to move the phone away from us. "You too? Has everyone lost their minds? Put Knox Thornfield on the phone right now." "I'm here, Rutherford," Knox said calmly. "What the hell kind of game are you playing?" Ford demanded. "Whatever my wife has told you, she's confused, possibly mentally ill. She has no authority to transfer any assets or file for divorce without my consent." "On the contrary," Knox replied, "Mrs. Hargrove has been of exceptionally sound mind while executing one of the most brilliantly planned financial and legal strategies I've witnessed in my 50 years of practice. As for authority, I suggest you review the business documents you've been signing for the past 2 decades. Your wife has had power of attorney and full signatory rights since you granted them to her during your gallbladder surgery in 2007. You never revoked them because you never believed she would understand how to use them." Another silence, this one filled with the weight of realization. "This won't stand," Ford finally said, his voice now deadly quiet. "I'll fight this with everything I have. I'll destroy you, Marlowe. Both of you." "With what resources?" I asked gently. "Your accounts are frozen. Your business contacts are already distancing themselves from you. By this afternoon, your club memberships will be suspended pending the fraud investigation. The DA's office is reviewing evidence as we speak. And your social circle, well, Wynne has been quite busy this morning." "Wynne?" The confusion in his voice was almost comical. "Wynne Davenport? What does she have to do with this?" "I'm right here, Ford," Wynne spoke up, leaning toward the phone. "Surprise. Turns out the women you discarded found each other, and we compared notes." I could almost see Ford's face draining of color as the full implications hit him. His former mistress and his wife, working together against him. "You won't get away with this," he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "I made you, Marlowe. Without me, you're nothing." "That's where you're wrong, Ford," I replied. "Without you, I'm finally free. And worth approximately $342 million according to the latest valuation of my assets, formerly your assets." I ended the call before he could respond. The room was silent for a moment, then Jasper squeezed my shoulder. "Mom, that was incredible." I looked at my son, the one person who had seen my worth when everyone else had dismissed me, and felt a rush of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed me. "Thank you for being here," I said softly. Zinnia was still sitting in shocked silence, trying to process everything she had heard. I knew it would take time for her to adjust to this new reality, to see her father as he truly was, to see me as more than the pathetic figure he had portrayed. "What happens now?" she finally asked, looking up at me with confusion in her eyes. "Now," I said, gathering the signed documents and handing them to Knox, "we finish what I started 18 years ago. And then I begin the rest of my life, on my terms." As Knox's team mobilized to file the final paperwork, I stood at the window overlooking Boston, the city where I had lived as a shadow for so long, and where I would now emerge into the light. Somewhere across town, Ford was facing the ruins of the empire he had built on cruelty and arrogance. "You're just worthless trash," he had told me again and again. Today, he was learning just how wrong he had been. The world didn't stop turning when Rutherford Hargrove's empire collapsed. The sun still rose the next morning, casting golden light across the bedroom of my new home, a sleek, modern penthouse overlooking the harbor that I had purchased through one of my shell companies 3 years earlier. Ford had never known of its existence, just as he had never known about so many aspects of my life during the latter years of our marriage. I sipped my coffee on the balcony, watching the early morning boats cutting through the water. For the first time in decades, I had slept deeply, without the constant tension that had been my companion through 45 years of marriage. No walking on eggshells, no bracing for criticism, no lying awake planning my escape. Just peace. My phone had been buzzing constantly since yesterday. News of Ford's downfall had spread through Boston's elite circles like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to talk to the woman who had engineered it. Former friends who had witnessed Ford's condescension toward me for years but never intervened. Society matrons who had smiled to my face while pitying me behind my back. Business associates of Ford's who had treated me as invisible at countless dinners and functions. I had no interest in speaking with any of them. The only calls I answered were from Jasper, Knox, and Wynne, and surprisingly, Zinnia. My daughter had left Knox's office yesterday in a daze, promising to call me once she'd had time to process everything. I hadn't expected to hear from her so soon. Her call had come at midnight, tearful, confused, angry, but also curious. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she had asked questions about me, wanted to know who I really was beyond the docile, unimpressive mother her father had conditioned her to see. It was a start. My phone buzzed again. Knox this time. "You've seen the morning papers, I assume?" he asked when I answered. "I've been avoiding them, actually," I replied. "I'm enjoying the quiet." "Well, when you're ready, you might want to take a look. Ford's fall is front-page news. The Boston Globe is calling it the most spectacular financial collapse in New England history. And there's more. 3 women have come forward alleging sexual harassment at Hargrove Developments over the years. This wasn't part of my plan, but it didn't surprise me. Ford's treatment of female employees had always been questionable at best. I had heard whispers over the years, but had been too trapped in my own situation to help anyone else. "Is there any mention of my role?" I asked. "Only speculation at this point. You're described as the reclusive wife who couldn't be reached for comment. Several financial experts are quoted expressing skepticism that you could have orchestrated such a complex takedown." I smiled at that. Even now, they were underestimating me. "Good," I said. "Let them speculate. I have no interest in becoming a public figure in all this." "That may be difficult to avoid," Knox cautioned. "The DA's office has requested a meeting with you. They're building a case against Ford for financial fraud, and you're their star witness." I had anticipated this. My revenge against Ford had always included the possibility of legal consequences for him. Consequences I had carefully ensured would not extend to me. Every transaction I had executed over the years had been meticulously documented and technically legal, if ethically questionable. I had used Ford's own methods against him, turning his greed and arrogance into the tools of his destruction. "Set up the meeting," I told Knox. "I'll cooperate fully." After ending the call, I finally opened my laptop to scan the morning news. Knox hadn't exaggerated. Ford's downfall was everywhere. Photos of him being escorted from his office building dominated the front pages, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. The coverage painted him as a financial tyrant whose empire had been built on sand, over-leveraged, mismanaged, and potentially fraudulent. One headline caught my eye. "Where was Mrs. Hargrove? Wife conspicuously absent as husband's empire crumbles." The article beneath it speculated about my whereabouts and my knowledge of the situation, describing me as the enigmatic spouse rarely seen in public without her husband, known primarily for her charitable work and garden club activities. There was a photo of us from a charity gala the previous year. Ford dominating the frame in an expensive tuxedo, me beside him in a conservative blue dress, eyes downcast, looking every bit the submissive wife he had crafted me to be. If they only knew. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Jasper entered, carrying a bag from my favorite bakery. "Breakfast delivery," he announced with a smile. "I figured you might not want to go out just yet." My son had stayed in a hotel last night, but had promised to come by this morning. Seeing him move comfortably through my new space, so at ease in my presence, filled me with a happiness I had almost forgotten was possible. "Have you spoken to your sister?" I asked as we settled at the dining table with coffee and pastries. "Briefly. She called me around 2 a.m. full of questions about Dad that I've been trying to answer for years. I think she's finally ready to hear the truth." "And Wallace?" Jasper's expression darkened slightly. "Uncle Wallace called me too. He's confused and angry, mostly at Dad, surprisingly. Apparently he found out that Ford has been embezzling from their shared family trust for years. The money I always thought Uncle Wallace was freely giving to Dad's business ventures wasn't given willingly at all. This was news to me. I had always assumed Wallace was a willing participant in his brother's financial schemes. Learning that he too had been a victim of Ford's manipulation added another layer to the complex tapestry of deceit my husband had woven. "The trust fund we set up for Wallace should ease that blow," I said. "I never wanted him to suffer for his brother's sins." Jasper reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? All these years planning, calculating, building your own empire right under Dad's nose. I knew you were smart, Mom, but this is something else entirely." I smiled, acknowledging the compliment, but also feeling the weight of what I had done. "Revenge is exhausting, Jasper. I don't regret it, not after what your father put me through, but I won't pretend it hasn't consumed me. Now that it's done, I need to figure out who I am beyond it." "You're Marlo Hargrove," he said simply, "the most patient and brilliant woman I know, and now you're free to be whoever else you want to be." My phone buzzed with another call, Wynn this time. "He's looking for you," she said without preamble when I answered. "Ford?" "Yes. He showed up at my place an hour ago, ranting, demanding to know where you are. He's convinced I know where you're hiding." A chill ran through me despite the warm morning. "What did you tell him?" "To go to hell, obviously. But Marlo, he's not in his right mind. He kept saying he was going to make you pay." I've called my security company to keep an eye on my house, but I thought you should know. I thanked her for the warning and ended the call, turning to Jasper with concern. Dad's looking for you? He asked, having heard enough of the conversation to understand. Should we be worried? I considered the question carefully. Ford had never been physically violent with me. His abuse had been entirely emotional and psychological. But he had never faced a situation like this before, never experienced such a complete loss of control and status. How would he react now that everything had been taken from him? I have security in the building, I said finally. And Ford doesn't know about this place. But maybe we should let Knox know, just in case. As Jasper called Knox to update him on the situation, I moved to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, the man who had controlled my life for almost half a century was searching for me, filled with rage and humiliation. The thought should have terrified me, but instead I felt strangely calm. I had lived in fear of Ford's disapproval and cruelty for so long that actual physical danger seemed almost insignificant in comparison. My phone buzzed again. A text from Sailor Reed, the young executive Ford had tried to use to humiliate me at a company party last year. She had approached me afterward, impressed by my quiet dignity in the face of Ford's mockery, and had unexpectedly become another ally in my plan. Just saw the news, her message read. You did it. He's finished. Let me know if you need anything. I smiled, thinking of the unlikely network of women I had assembled over the years, all of them underestimated or mistreated by Ford in some way, all of them eager to see his downfall. Win, his discarded mistress. Sailor, the young executive whose ideas he had stolen and presented as his own. Several of his former assistants who had provided key information about his business dealings. Even Luz, our housekeeper, who had quietly observed his cruelty for decades and had never betrayed my confidence. Together, we had formed a silent army, moving pieces into place while Ford remained oblivious, secure in his belief that women, particularly women like me, posed no threat to his power. Jasper ended his call with Knox and turned to me with a serious expression. Knox thinks we should consider a restraining order against Dad. He says it's a precaution worth taking, given the circumstances. I nodded, though the idea seemed surreal, that I would need legal protection from the man I had been married to for 45 years. But then, everything about the past 24 hours had been surreal. He's sending someone over with the paperwork, Jasper continued, and he suggests we stay in today. He'll handle the meeting with the DA's office tomorrow instead. As if on cue, my phone rang again. An unknown number this time. I hesitated before answering, putting it on speaker so Jasper could hear. Mrs. Hargrove? An unfamiliar female voice came through the line. This is Detective Ramsey with Boston PD. I'm calling regarding your husband, Rutherford Hargrove. My heart skipped a beat. Yes? What about him? There's been an incident. Mr. Hargrove was involved in a physical altercation at the Hargrove Development offices this morning. He's currently in custody. Jasper and I exchanged shocked glances. What kind of altercation? I asked carefully. He assaulted his former CFO, a Mr. Gregory Palmer. Witnesses say Mr. Hargrove was demanding information about financial transfers and became violent when Mr. Palmer couldn't provide answers. Mr. Palmer has been taken to Mass General with facial injuries. Gregory Palmer, Ford's right-hand man for over 20 years, and someone who had known nothing about my systematic dismantling of the company. He had been as shocked as Ford by the collapse, and now he had paid a physical price for that ignorance. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely troubled by this turn of events. Is there something you need from me, Detective? Mr. Hargrove is requesting your presence at the station. He's entitled to a phone call, but he's demanding to see you in person instead. You're under no obligation to come in, of course. I wanted to inform you of the situation and see if you're willing to speak with him. Was I willing to face Ford now, in his moment of complete unraveling? Part of me wanted to stay far away, to let him stew in the consequences of his actions without giving him the satisfaction of confronting me. But another part, the part that had planned meticulously for 18 years, wanted to look him in the eye just once as equals, no longer the cowering wife he had created. I'll come to the station, I decided, but I'll be bringing my attorney with me. After ending the call, I turned to Jasper, who looked concerned. Are you sure about this, Mom? You don't owe him anything. I know, I said. But this might be my only chance to truly finish this, to say the things I've been holding back for decades. I need that closure, Jasper. He nodded, understanding. Then I'm coming with you. While Jasper called Knox to inform him of the change in plans, I went to my bedroom to change. The woman who would face Ford today would look nothing like the wife he remembered. I selected a tailored black pantsuit that emphasized my still trim figure, paired with a deep emerald blouse that brought out the green in my eyes. My hair, which Ford had always insisted I wear in a conservative bun, fell in soft waves around my shoulders, the silver streaks catching the light. Knox met us at the police station, his expression grave. You don't have to do this, Marlowe. We can request that any communication with Ford go through me from now on. I appreciate that, Knox, but I need to do this. For me, not for him. The detective led us through the station to a small conference room used for attorney-client meetings. Ford would be brought in momentarily, she explained. He was being held on assault charges, with bail yet to be determined. His attorney hasn't arrived yet, Detective Ramsey added. He refused to call anyone but you. That was surprising. Ford had a team of high-powered lawyers at his disposal, or at least he had before yesterday. Now, I supposed, those lawyers were probably distancing themselves from him as quickly as possible. I should warn you, the detective continued. He's in a highly agitated state. If at any point you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, just signal, and we'll remove him immediately. I nodded, taking a seat at the table with Knox beside me. Jasper positioned himself against the wall behind me, a protective presence at my back. The door opened, and 2 officers led Ford in, handcuffed. I barely recognized the man before me. His usually immaculate appearance was in disarray. Shirt wrinkled and stained, hair disheveled, face haggard with shock and fury. He looked like he had aged a decade overnight, his eyes locked on mine, blazing with hatred. You, he spat, as the officers seated him across from me. You did this, all of it. Yes, I said simply, meeting his gaze without flinching. I did. Ford lunged forward as far as his restraints would allow, causing Jasper to step forward and the officers to tense. You think you're so clever, don't you? Sneaking around behind my back for years, stealing what was mine. You ungrateful bitch. After everything I gave you. What exactly did you give me, Ford? I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. A life of constant criticism? Decades of emotional abuse? The experience of being called worthless trash in front of our children, our friends, even strangers? I gave you a life of luxury, he snarled. A position in society, a home most women would kill for. And this is how you repay me? I leaned forward slightly, holding his gaze. No, Ford. You gave me a prison. You took a bright, ambitious young woman and systematically crushed her spirit until there was nothing left but a shell that existed to serve your needs and boost your ego. But you made one critical mistake. And what was that? He sneered. You underestimated me. You were so convinced of my worthlessness that you never bothered to look closely at what I was doing. You signed whatever I put in front of you because you couldn't imagine I was smart enough to understand business. You gave me access to everything because you thought I was too stupid to use it. Ford's face contorted with rage, but beneath it, I could see the dawning realization that his own arrogance had been the weapon of his destruction. Everything I did was legal, I continued calmly. Every transfer, every investment, every acquisition, all executed with the power of attorney you so carelessly gave me. I just had the patience to do it slowly, piece by piece, over 18 years. 18 years, he repeated, the number seeming to stagger him. You've been planning this for 18 years? Since my 50th birthday. The one you forgot entirely because you were too busy with your newest mistress. I realized that day that I might have another 30 years ahead of me. I could spend them continuing to wither away under your cruelty, or I could take control of my future. I chose the latter. Ford's eyes darted to Knox, then to Jasper, clearly looking for any sign of sympathy or alliance. Finding none, he turned back to me, his expression shifting from rage to something else, calculation. We can fix this, Marlowe, he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Whatever you think I've done to you, we can work it out. We've been married for 45 years. That has to count for something. I almost laughed at the transparency of his manipulation. It counts for quite a lot, actually. 45 years of being told I was worthless. 45 years of infidelity and humiliation. 45 years of watching you turn our daughter against me and drive our son away. Yes, those years count for everything in why we're sitting here today. Ford's facade of reasonableness cracked instantly. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "When this is over, when I've cleared my name and rebuilt what you've stolen, I'll make sure you end up with nothing. You're nothing without me, Marlo. You never were, and you never will be." I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket with steady hands. "That's where you're wrong, Ford. I was everything before I met you. A brilliant student with a promising future. And I'm everything now that I'm free of you. A woman who outsmarted the great Rutherford Hargrove at his own game. You, on the other hand, are facing assault charges, financial ruin, and a very public divorce. So tell me, which one of us is nothing now?" Without waiting for his response, I turned to leave. Behind me, Ford erupted in a stream of obscenities and threats so vile that the officers moved to restrain him more securely. "You can't leave me here," he shouted as I reached the door. "I'm your husband." I paused, looking back at him one last time. Not for much longer. Outside the police station, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in decades. Jasper placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Better than okay," I replied truthfully. "For the first time in 45 years, I feel completely free." Knox joined us, his usual stoic expression softened with something like admiration. "That was quite something in there, Marlo. In all my years of practice, I've never seen anyone handle a confrontation with such composure." "Years of practice," I said with a small smile. "Decades of holding my tongue, choosing my battles, and planning my escape. Today was just the final act." As we walked toward Knox's waiting car, my phone buzzed with a text from Zinnia. "I need to see you. On my terms, not Dad's. Dinner tonight?" I showed the message to Jasper, who raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's unexpected. Are you going to go?" I considered the question. My relationship with my daughter had been strained for most of her adult life, as she sided with her father and adopted his dismissive attitude toward me. But now, with Ford's facade shattered and the truth exposed, perhaps there was a chance to rebuild what had been lost. Yes, I decided, it's time for Zinnia to get to know her real mother. As we drove away from the police station, I gazed out at the Boston streets, the same city where I had lived for decades, but now seeing it through new eyes. No longer Rutherford Hargrove's invisible wife, but Marlo Hargrove in my own right. Wealthy, powerful, and finally, irrevocably free. The empire I had built in secret was now mine to command openly. The life I had deferred for 45 years was now mine to live fully. And the woman I had buried beneath layers of submission and pretense was now free to emerge into the light. Ford had called me worthless trash for decades. Now he knew my true worth, and so did I. 6 months passed like a dream. Winter yielded to spring, and with it came a rebirth that mirrored my own transformation. The Boston elite had quickly adjusted to the new reality. Rutherford Hargrove was no longer a power player, and his formerly invisible wife now controlled one of the largest private fortunes in New England. The scandal had dominated local news for weeks. Ford's assault on his CFO had resulted in a 6-month sentence, reduced to 3 for good behavior. The financial fraud investigation had uncovered decades of questionable business practices, leading to additional charges that were still working their way through the courts. Ford's reputation, once sterling in business circles, was in tatters. I had kept a low profile throughout, declining interviews and avoiding public appearances. My revenge had never been about fame or public humiliation. It was personal, a reckoning long overdue between a man who had spent decades crushing a woman's spirit and the woman who had finally reclaimed her power. My penthouse overlooking the harbor had become a sanctuary, a place entirely my own where no echo of Ford's criticism lingered in the corners. I had decorated it exactly as I pleased. Modern, minimalist, with splashes of bold color Ford would have deemed garish or common. Every piece of furniture, every artwork, every book on the shelves reflected my tastes alone. Jasper had stayed in Boston for a month after Ford's arrest before returning to his life in Seattle, where he ran a successful architectural firm, pursuing the career I'd once dreamed of before Ford crushed that ambition. We spoke daily now, our relationship stronger than ever. He had invited me to visit in the summer, to meet his longtime partner whom Ford had refused to acknowledge, and to see the home they had built together. My relationship with Zinnia had taken a more complicated path. Our dinner the night after Ford's arrest had been tense, filled with recriminations and tears. She had accused me of destroying her family out of spite, of waiting until she was attached to her father's business before pulling the rug out from under both of them. "You could have left years ago if you were so unhappy," she had argued, her voice bitter. "Why wait until now? Why take everything?" I had explained as calmly as I could, about the financial control Ford had exerted, about the emotional prison I had lived in, about the careful patience required to extract myself without losing everything. I had reminded her of incidents she had witnessed throughout her childhood, moments of cruelty she had normalized or ignored because they didn't align with the image of her father she preferred to maintain. We had parted that night with no resolution, but the seeds had been planted. Over the following weeks, Zinnia had begun to reach out, tentatively at first, then with increasing frequency. She had questions about her childhood, about my life before Ford, about who I really was beneath the submissive facade I had maintained for decades. 3 months after Ford's downfall, Zinnia had shown up at my door with a box of old photographs she had found while cleaning out her father's home office. "I don't remember you ever looking this happy," she had said, showing me a picture from before my marriage. A young woman with bright eyes and an uninhibited smile, standing proudly in front of a university building. I had replied simply. Before. That day had marked a turning point in our relationship. Zinnia had stayed for hours, looking through photographs, asking about my college years, my dreams of becoming an architect. The woman I had been before Rutherford Hargrove had systematically dismantled my sense of self. Now, 6 months after Ford's arrest, Zinnia was coming for dinner again. This time bringing her husband and children, who had always been kept somewhat distant from me by Ford's influence. He had convinced them all that Grandma Marlowe was a fragile, somewhat pitiable figure who shouldn't be troubled with too much noise or excitement. As I prepared for their visit, selecting wines and checking on the meal being prepared by the personal chef I had hired, one of many luxuries I now allowed myself without guilt, my phone rang. Knox calling with his weekly update. Ford had been released from jail 2 weeks earlier. The terms of his release included a restraining order preventing him from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of any of my properties. He was living in a small apartment paid for by Wallace, who had, surprisingly, maintained a relationship with his brother despite learning of Ford's financial manipulations. "There's been a development," Knox said, his voice carefully neutral. "Ford is requesting a meeting with you through his new attorney. He's proposing a settlement agreement." I sat down at my kitchen island, absorbing this unexpected turn. What kind of settlement? "He's offering to drop all claims to any marital assets and sign whatever paperwork you require to finalize the divorce cleanly. In exchange, he's asking for a modest monthly stipend, enough to live on, but not extravagantly, and for you to drop the remaining civil suits against him." I considered the proposal. The financial fraud investigations would continue regardless. Those were criminal matters beyond my control. But I had indeed filed several civil suits against Ford for financial malfeasance and emotional distress. They were primarily strategic, designed to keep him legally entangled and financially drained while the divorce proceedings advanced. "Why now?" I asked. "His lawyer claims he's had a change of heart during his incarceration. Found religion, apparently." The skepticism in Knox's voice matched my own feelings. "More likely, he's realized that fighting you is futile and expensive. The little money he has left is being drained by legal fees." "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Let me discuss it with Jasper and Zinnia first." After ending the call, I moved to my balcony, gazing out at the harbor while processing this new development. Was I willing to show Ford mercy after decades of receiving none from him? Did I want to extend this battle, or was it time to truly move forward? My thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Zinnia and her family. Her husband, Marcus, a quiet, thoughtful man who had always seemed uncomfortable around Ford, embraced me warmly. Their children, 12-year-old Eliza and 9-year-old Carter, hung back shyly, clearly unsure how to interact with this new version of their grandmother. Over dinner, I watched my grandchildren gradually relax, responding to my genuine interest in their lives, their hobbies, their friends, their dreams. Carter, discovering my collection of architectural books, lit up when I mentioned my own abandoned aspirations in that field. "You wanted to be an architect? Like Uncle Jasper?" he asked, eyes wide with surprise. "I did," I confirmed with a smile. "I was actually accepted to Harvard's graduate program before I met your grandfather." Zinnia looked up sharply at this revelation, another piece of my history she had never known. "Why didn't you go?" Eliza asked innocently. I considered how to answer truthfully without burdening a child with the harsh realities of my marriage. "Sometimes life takes us in different directions than we planned," I said finally. "But it's never too late to find your way back to what you love." Later, after the children had been settled in the guest bedroom for the night, I told Zinnia and Marcus about Ford's settlement offer. "He's desperate," Zinnia said immediately. "Running out of money and options." "Probably," I agreed. "The question is whether I want to continue this fight or end it cleanly." Zinnia studied me thoughtfully. "What would bring you the most peace, Mom? Not what would hurt Dad the most, but what would help you move forward?" The question touched me deeply. Evidence of how far my daughter had come in seeing me as a person with needs and feelings of my own, not just as an extension of her father. I began slowly, "I think I'm ready for this chapter to close. The last 6 months have been about reclaiming my life, not just punishing your father. Maybe it's time to focus entirely on the future." Marcus nodded approvingly. "There's wisdom in that. Carrying anger, even justified anger, is exhausting." "Then accept the settlement," Zinnia said decisively. "Give him the stipend, you can certainly afford it, and be done with him for good. Just make sure the legal agreements are airtight." I smiled at her practical approach, so like me in ways she was only beginning to recognize. "I'll talk to Knox tomorrow." 2 weeks later, I sat across from Ford in a sterile conference room at Knox's office, our attorneys flanking us on either side. It was the first time I had seen him since that day at the police station. The intervening months had not been kind to him. He looked diminished somehow, thinner, grayer, the arrogant posture replaced by a slight stoop. The settlement agreement lay on the table between us. Knox had indeed made it airtight. Ford would receive a modest monthly stipend that would allow him to live comfortably but not lavishly. In exchange, he relinquished all claims to any assets, agreed to the divorce terms without contest, and would make no public statements about me or our marriage. As Ford signed each page with a hand that trembled slightly, I felt no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, only a profound sense of closure. The man before me no longer held any power over me, not even the power to provoke strong emotions. When he finished signing, he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "I still don't understand how you did it," he said quietly. "All those years, right under my nose." "You never really saw me, Ford," I replied simply. "That was your mistake." He nodded slowly, as if finally accepting this truth. "For what it's worth, which isn't much, I know that now." It wasn't an apology. Ford was constitutionally incapable of true contrition, but it was perhaps as close as he would ever come to acknowledging the reality of our marriage. I signed my sections of the agreement without further comment. When the last page was complete, Knox gathered the documents and nodded to Ford's attorney. "We're done here." As Ford rose to leave, he paused, looking at me one last time. "Goodbye, Marlowe." "Goodbye, Rutherford," I replied, using his full name deliberately. A small reminder that the days of accommodating his preferences were over. After he left, Knox turned to me with a rare smile. "Congratulations, you're officially divorced, and the last of the legal entanglements are resolved. You're truly free now. Free." The word resonated through me like a bell. Free of Ford, free of pretense, free of the careful double life I had maintained for so long. Free to be Marlowe Hargrove, not as someone's wife, but as myself. In the year that followed, I embraced that freedom with a joy that surprised even me. I established a foundation to support women leaving abusive relationships, providing not just shelter and emotional support, but financial education and career development. I funded a scholarship for female architecture students at my alma mater. I traveled to places Ford had always dismissed as not worth the effort. The Galapagos Islands, Kyoto, Machu Picchu. Jasper and I renovated a historic building in downtown Boston, transforming it into affordable studio spaces for artists and architects. Zinnia, after initially struggling to find her footing in the aftermath of her father's downfall, discovered a talent for nonprofit management and now ran my foundation with passion and purpose. My grandchildren grew comfortable with the grandmother they were only now truly getting to know, a woman with opinions and interests, stories and skills, warmth and wisdom that had been carefully hidden away during their early years. Sometimes I caught glimpses of Ford in the society pages, attending charity events with Wallace, considerably more subdued than in his glory days. We never spoke again after that final meeting, and I found that I thought of him less and less as time went on. On my 70th birthday, surrounded by Jasper, Zinnia, their families, and friends I had made in my new life, I looked around at the gathering and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the wealth or the freedom, though those were certainly welcome, but for the discovery that it was never too late to reclaim one's life. "You're just worthless trash," my husband had mocked for decades, until he discovered everything was in my name. But the true discovery had been mine. Finding the woman who had been waiting patiently beneath the facade all along, ready to emerge when the time was right. If you've enjoyed my story of transformation and reclaiming power, please hit that subscribe button below. I share new chapters of resilience every week, and I'd love to have you join me on this journey of strength and rebirth.